Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of ArtByRow.com, where I help hobby artists grow by teaching them how to focus on the process rather than the outcome. I specialize in developing creativity, creating more art in less time, and using graffiti art to generate ideas instead of always wondering what you should be working on. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, subscribe so you get notified whenever new videos get uploaded. Now let's head on over to the art studio and do some drawings. We're going to work on today's tutorial together. Let's head on over. Hey, today we're going to be making some roses, and I am doing mine on artist trading cards, which I typically do. They're a great time saver. I can put them in a portfolio in a 3-ring binder and keep track of my artwork to go back and look at them. Or I can trade them with other artists for their artwork. So a lot of benefits to doing them on artist trading cards. Today I'm going to be doing it on white cardstock that I have pre-cut my card from. I also like doing them on this toned paper, but for the purposes of recording the video, it makes it a little bit harder to see the pencil lines on it. So I'm going to stick with the white. There's a lot of different designs you can do. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. You can create them in different styles. You can do different backgrounds, and I'll show you some examples at the end of the video after the drawing's completed. I'll show you some different things that I did, and we'll talk about some different variations that you can do. So a lot of different things you can do to change it up a little bit. So let's go ahead with the drawing. What I like to do with mine is to just kind of start out with sort of an undershape of the rosebud itself. Because if you think about a rose and how it blooms, you can draw your roses in various states of bloom. And if you think about it when it starts, it's all wrapped in together in that rosebud. So if you just make kind of a teardrop or a triangle shape, it gives you that base to work from, and then you can develop out how much you want it to open up and at what stage you want it to be in. So now we just want to kind of start getting these petal forms coming out from around that, where that rosebud is. And we're going to keep some of this, so we'll darken it up as we go. And you can also draw the petals themselves differently in different styles. You can keep your lines smooth. You can make them a little more jagged or wavy, depending on how you want your final rose to look. And again, I'll show you some examples in a little bit here to illustrate what I mean by this. Because the fun thing about art is that you can really develop it into your own style and make it a little more stylized and a little more suited to your personal interest. Art is something that's very personal to each of us, and how we do our drawings, how we finish our drawings. So as we keep working on this, I'm going to show you how I do mine and how I finish them, how I color my drawings. And that's something that's personal to me and my artistic style. So if there's anything that you don't quite like or that you would change about your drawings, then absolutely change that when you're doing yours. I'm just showing you one way that you can do this, and there's so many different ways that you could do your drawings, your artwork. So what you want to do is, when you're watching these videos, whether it's mine or somebody else's, you want to pay attention to what you like about the drawing and what you don't like about the drawing. If you're following somebody's instruction videos, If you're following an instruction video and there's parts of it that you don't care for, pay attention to that. And you can kind of pick and choose from what you like and what you don't like. And then create your own style from that. Because your style, it's going to develop over time, and chances are it'll probably change. But you pick up your style from noticing the things you like and the things you don't like. And then you can alter that a little bit and kind of mix and match different styles and techniques. And from there, you'll develop your own personal artistic style. So if you feel like you don't really have a style yet, then just keep practicing, keep following different artists and different teachers and lessons, and just really notice the things you like and the things you don't like. So, for example, one of the things that I do is I tend to put a thick black outline on my drawings because that's what appeals to me. So that has just become part of my style. But you could do yours with a thin black outline, you could do a color outline, you could do no outline at all. I like to use markers because I like how bold the colors are. And that could be something that you don't really like. Maybe you like a more muted color, and that's perfectly okay. The thing with art is there's really no right or wrong way. There's fundamentals and there's things that are considered fundamentally right or wrong, but forever artists have been breaking the rules and going against what's considered to be right, and that's what made them famous, was because they went out on their own and did something that everybody told them was wrong and you just don't do, and they became famous for it. So academically, sure, there's things that we're supposed to do and follow the rules of design and all those sorts of things, but there's nothing that says that you can't do whatever it is you want to do and take your own path with your art. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not the end of the world, so don't ever feel like your thoughts and your ideas about your art and how you create it are wrong. Because if it's your style and your interest, then you should pursue that and see what it looks like. So all of this to say that when you're following the instructions, my intention isn't for you to exactly copy what I'm drawing. My goal is always to inspire you to come up with your own drawings, to do something a little bit different, change it up a little bit, but most of all, just have fun with it. So the sketch part of it's done. And all you want to do is just kind of build it out as you're drawing it. And you want to get some variation of where your lines are. Like, you don't want everything to line up so it looks like a circle shape. You want to add some where you have some different negative space in here. This comes out further than this. These come out here. These are the leaves. We'll make those leaves. And these are just all the petals of the rose. And you just want to change it up a little bit. So everything, you don't want everything to be completely even. You want it to have some variation as it goes around. So the next step is going to be, like I said, I like to outline with black. So the next step is going to be to do the black outline. I like using these Sharpie pens. There's a ton of different types of pen or markers or whatever you want to do for your outline. Or like I said earlier, maybe you don't like black. Maybe you don't want to do a black outline. That's personal preference. So we're going to go ahead and get the outline started. So when you're doing your outline, And whether you do it in black or maybe you want to do it a red outline, you could do maybe like a darker red outline and then do a lighter red for your colors would be an option. You could do an outline with the marker and then color it with colored pencil. And one of the things that I really love about working on artist trading cards is because they save time, it gives you a lot more freedom to experiment and try some new things and not be afraid of ruining your drawing. So if you were drawing, say you decided to draw your rose in a sketchbook, on a page of your sketchbook, and depending on the size of your sketchbook and how big you were trying to draw, if you wanted to try filling up the entire page of your sketchbook, then that would take you considerably longer than doing it on something like an artist trading card or some other small format. And when you're doing that, if I'm spending a couple of hours on a drawing, I am not going to feel like that would be the time that I want to experiment and try something different and just to see what it looks like. But if you're doing something on an artist trading card, for example, they don't take that long to do. So if I wanted to experiment, try something different, play around with my designs or my techniques a little bit, maybe try something I've never done before. If I'm doing it on something like an artist trading card, or it doesn't necessarily even have to be an artist trading card, just something that's a smaller scale, you have a lot more freedom to play around and experiment and try something different, because if you're only spending 20 minutes or a half hour on your drawing, if you mess it up, it's not so devastating as if you were spending a couple of hours on working on a drawing. And to me, the experimenting and playing around and trying different things, that's what I find fun and exciting about artwork in doing these drawings, is trying something new, trying something different, trying some different backgrounds. Seeing, can you push it a little bit further? Can you do something a little crazy? Sometimes with my drawings, I like to do like these really jagged, kind of crazy looking outlines on something. You know, like I could maybe do a rose and not have any soft edges, I guess you could say. Like everything would be straight lines and points, just to see what it looks like, just to kind of play around with it a little bit. Give it a little bit more of a style to it, something a little bit different. But again, if I'm spending a couple hours on a drawing, I am really not going to feel comfortable trying something completely different. So that's why I tend to do them on the artist trading cards. That, and because with my schedule between working and taking care of the house and cooking and cleaning and everything else that comes with the fun responsibilities of being grown up, I don't have a ton of time left over. So if I can work small, then I can get a lot more drawing time in. Or not really drawing time, it doesn't give me more time, but it gives me more opportunities for different things that I can draw. And I love being able to just put them in my binder and go back and look at them if I want to. So there's the outline. And like I said, this is just how I tend to do mine. I like to add a little bit heavier outline on the outside. And the reason I use this pen instead of a marker for that is because the markers tend to bleed into the paper a little bit. And it's not real bad depending on what type of markers you use and the paper you're using. It's not really bad, but this pen gives a really crisp edge where the markers, it'll be a little fuzzy. And it's not terrible, it's not super fuzzy, but it doesn't give as crisp of an edge as what the pen does. So I usually just use the pen and then go over it and make it darker, make it a little bit thicker. But I also find that very relaxing. Some people might think that it feels very tedious. I find it relaxing for whatever reason, so it doesn't bother me to go back over it and spend that extra time. So, but like I said, do it the way that feels right for you and that you enjoy, and that's the way you should be doing things. So the next thing I need to do is grab some markers. So I'm gonna stop the camera for a little bit, go grab me some markers, figure out what colors I want to use, and then I'll be back with you and we'll talk about how to pick the colors, and we'll go ahead and get this guy finished up. All right, so I got my colors, and what I do with my markers, and I use alcohol-based markers so that they can blend together with the colors. And what I do is I just take a leftover scrap piece of cardstock and I test out my colors here, and then that way I know if they're gonna blend together good or not. And I usually like to use 2 or 3 colors for each section. And then what I do is, I'm gonna start with the leaf. What I do is I like to lay down the base layer with the lightest color first. And then I'll take my darker color and I'll add some areas with the darker color. Now, like with anything, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And you should be doing your color however you think it looks good. I'm showing you one way, I'm showing you the way that I work. That does not mean that it's the right way or the only way. I'm just showing you a way to get started. I like to give you a starting point to work from. And then just to take those first steps, and then you can modify things however you want. Watch some other videos, some other instructions, and the way other people do it. And then you come up with what feels right and looks right to you and go from there. So I know from past experience that these 2 markers blend together nicely, and you can use any brands, it doesn't matter, you can mix and match the brands. The brand of marker and the style of marker that you use will be mostly a personal preference. There are some limiting factors as far as how they work and of course your budget. You can, as you can see, I have, this one's a Sharpie, this one is a touch marker. And you can mix the different brands together, it doesn't really matter. One thing I have recently discovered though, is if you get the really cheap alcohol-based markers, or at least this one particular brand that someone had got for me, and I was using them, one thing I noticed is that if you oversaturate the paper with the markers, that they'll bleed. I guess I shouldn't. So what causes the oversaturation is that the alcohol that's in these markers is what allows you to blend them together, because the paper will actually get wet. If you touch it, you can feel, it'll feel cold when it's still wet. And then after the alcohol evaporates and it dries, you don't feel the coolness of it anymore, I guess. That's what I notice about it anyway. If I touch it, it feels cold to the touch. But at any rate, if you work back and forth, you'll be putting more alcohol onto the paper, and you need to blend them while they're wet when you're blending your markers together. If you want to work that way and you want to blend your colors, then you have to work while they're still wet. If you're not trying to blend the colors, then you don't. But if you want your colors to have a smoother transition, then you'll definitely want to make sure you're working while the markers are still wet. And you can use either 2 or 3 colors. But back to what I was saying about the really cheap markers. A friend of mine had bought some markers for me that she seen somewhere at a store she was at, and she knew that I liked using markers. So she was thinking of me, and she got them for me, which was a very nice gesture. But I'm sure most of us have experienced this, where the people purchasing these gifts don't really understand that there's a lot to be considered with the types of supplies that we use, and that they're definitely not all created equally. But I wanted to go ahead and give these markers a try, so I did. And I think they were I had never heard of the brand. I think they were just something that was maybe at Hobby Lobby or Michael's or something, one of our local arts and crafts stores. But what I noticed about it is that if you work back and forth too much, those markers oversaturate the paper, and then it bleeds outside of the line, and you're left with a fuzzy drawing when you're done, which definitely is not the look that I was going for. But I did try them out. I don't use them a lot because I'm not going to say it ruined my drawing, but it definitely could have. I just went back and added a heavier outline on it. But it was something that I learned about those particular markers, is that I have to not overwork the area with them. Where with the little bit better quality markers, you can work back and forth with them, and the paper doesn't tend to oversaturate like it did with the cheaper markers, the off-brand markers. So it's just something to consider. That doesn't mean you can't make them work for you. I have used those off-brand markers since that first drawing that I did with them, and I just know that I can't work back and forth with them too much. Because sometimes you want to go, depending on the drawing, you might want to go back and touch something up a little bit or darken an area up. And with those off-brand markers, you can't do that too much, or it really oversaturates the paper. And the other thing, like if I turn this over, you can see a little bit bleeding through. But those other markers, the whole back side of it was all completely solid colors from it bleeding through. So definitely just something to keep in mind. But and then when I say one of the things to consider is the style of the markers, what I'm just talking about the nibs or the tips on them. So these touch markers have one end's a fine point and one end is a chisel. And of course, most of you are familiar with the Sharpies. It just has the one end, which is fine. It usually does the trick, but some of them, like this is a Prismacolor, and it has the broad tip, and then it's got a real fine tip on this side, which I found to be completely useless because the pigment don't come out of it. It's always dried up. And these markers, I think they've redesigned them since then. The Prismacolor, those are actually the original markers I bought probably, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe longer. And they're still fine. They still work. They sat for a while. I took a little break from my artwork for several years, and the markers just sat in a container somewhere, and they're still fine. They all still work. But normally what people tend to do, and what I did for sure, was just kind of play around, experiment, try some different brands of markers, see what I like, what I don't like. So that's really the best thing, is just to try it for yourself. And for sure, a lot of it has to do with budget. The Copic markers are really good. I don't do illustration work or commission work, so I don't know, it's kind of like it's a little bit of overkill for me to spend the extra money to go with the Copic markers. I've never really used them a whole lot. I have a couple just because I wanted to see what was so special about them. And of course, that's just my own personal view on them. I don't see anything that would justify me spending the money on them. But like I said, I don't do commission work, and I don't do illustration work. So I believe they are like light fast, and they have like a higher rating on them and stuff like that. So if you're doing commission work, or if you're doing professional level work, that would probably be the way to go. But again, it's just something, if it fits within your budget and you like them, then that's your personal decision. We all have to make these decisions on our own. So, and you can, one of the things people ask me is, if you go over top of a dark marker with a lighter color marker, won't it ruin the marker and pick up the colors? And it does not. As you can see, I'm using these same 3 markers, and I'm going back and forth over them, and it's not leaving any transfer of color or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about that. You're not going to ruin your markers by going back over top. And they do make what are called colorless blenders, and they're just clear. There's no color to them. Let's see if I can find one here. This one actually is a Copic. They're just clear, and you can use those to blend. The only reason I don't use them is because I can use these other markers. They work just fine. And I already have it here. It's just one less marker to switch back and forth between. They do come in handy if you make a mistake, you go outside of your line. You can actually use a colorless blender like an eraser to some extent. It doesn't remove the colors altogether most of the time, but it will significantly lighten it up to the point where it's almost not even noticeable anymore. So if you go outside the line or you make a mistake, you can use that colorless blender and kind of scrub the area, and it'll lift that color up. Actually, it does a pretty good job of it, to be honest. Like I said, it doesn't remove it completely, but I'd have to say it actually comes pretty close to removing it. So as you can see, like sometimes you do want to go back in and add some more color to an area, darken it up a little bit. And if you're doing that and the alcohol hasn't evaporated yet, then you're adding more moisture, dampness to the paper. So that's how you can end up oversaturating your paper without intentionally doing it, I guess. Because you might, as you're working, you can see like, oh, I want to add a little bit of darker there, touch it up here. Just, you know, you kind of work back and forth as you're working, and you take a minute to kind of look back and you see the areas that you might want to darken up or go back over or blend a little bit better. So every time you go back over that area, you're adding more alcohol to the paper. And that's where you can tend to oversaturate it. But I've never oversaturated the paper with the name brand markers. But the first time that I used the off-brand markers, the paper became oversaturated and it made like a fuzzy outline around everything with the marker, and it bled through really bad. And of course the paper matters too. I'm just using a cardstock. I buy sheets of cardstock and then I cut them down to make my artist trading cards out of them. And I could probably try using a higher quality paper, and that maybe would help, but it's not a problem if I'm using the name brand markers. And it doesn't really seem to matter if it's Bic or Sharpie or the Prismacolor or the touch markers, any of the name brand ones. And the Arteza, they're reasonably priced and I haven't had any issues with those. It's really just they're more of like a craft grade marker, like a student grade marker maybe. I don't know how they're actually rated, but if you stick with the name brands, they're not super expensive. If you have the budget to use the name brands, I would suggest that. I think Sharpies are probably my least favorite, and that's mostly just because of the odor that Sharpies have. Sharpies, for whatever reason, are a lot stronger than the other markers, and I have a sensitivity to smells, and it will end up giving me a headache or sometimes even a migraine, so it's not really worth it to me. But if you stick with any of the other ones, even the Bic markers, they seem like they work pretty good. The bad thing with the Bic markers, and the same thing with the Sharpies, is you're kind of limited on the availability of colors. So it's a little bit harder to blend them. So what I would do next is just kind of look at it and see where I could darken it up a little bit. And the other thing I should note is that if you go back over an area with the same marker, it will darken it up as you add layers to it. Each layer will make it a little bit darker. And then typically what I do for my drawings, if I don't want to do a full background, is I'll take another color and I make what I call a halo around it. I don't know if there's actually a technical name. I guess it could be maybe an aura. But I'll just take a color that I want to use, and then I just put one pass of the marker just all the way around the outside edge, just to kind of break up that white a little bit and accent the drawing. And you could fill in the whole background. You could do some kind of drawing in the background if you wanted to. Try to straighten this up here and get it in the frame. Now the other thing you can do is add with either a paint marker, or I like using these Jelly Roll pens. You can add some little areas of white. The one thing I should mention is that if the marker is still wet, sometimes this white will kind of soak into the paper. And if that happens, just let your marker dry a little bit more, and then you can go right back over it again. And let the Jelly Roll dry a little bit before you go back over it, and then just go right over top of it, and it'll show up a little bit better. And this is optional. It's up to you. Sometimes I'm in the mood to add a little bit of white in here to break up the color a little bit, and sometimes not. But again, whatever you think looks good, whatever looks right. So there is the finished drawing. And I do want to show you some examples of some other designs that I did. So just playing around with the background and the way that the backgrounds are done. I did some hatching and cross hatching in some of these, experimenting with some different colors. This one was done on the toned paper, and then just kind of playing around with different colors for the roses. So this one I did blue, obviously. Another one on the toned paper with the purple flower. This was one where I kind of played around a little bit with having the sharper edges instead of having them rounded, and just playing around with the style a little bit. Different stages of bloom. Couldn't think of the word there. And just trying some different things. This one was a lot of fun. I did it on, you can't really see, but I made bleeding tissue paper backgrounds. That's what all this is. But I did the whole card in warm colors, and then let that dry, and then I did my rose right over top of that. So again, this is just why I like doing the artist trading cards, because it gives you a little bit of freedom to play around with it and try new things and experiment. So that's it. I hope you feel inspired to do some of your own rose drawings. I hope you feel encouraged and motivated, and I will see you in the next video. Happy creating! So how did you do? Hopefully you followed along with the tutorial and worked on your own artwork. If you enjoyed this and you want to get notified of other lessons that are coming up in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and you'll get notified whenever something new gets uploaded. Have a good day and happy creating!